Have you ever felt like you were living in a prison with no bars? Where the person who claims to love you the most is the one keeping you captive, using your own body as the weapon? That's exactly how I lived for more than 30 years, and only now, at 70, have I found the courage to speak. My name is Margaret. Today I'm over 70 years old. I've been through many things in this life, but this was too much for one human being. I'm going to tell you everything in this story. I still remember the smell of grease that filled our kitchen. Bacon sizzling early in the morning, potatoes drowning in oil, donuts arriving fresh from the corner bakery. All of it mixed with the sound of my husband Gerald, chewing loudly and laughing at my failed attempts to say no. He laughed like he was saying, "You can't do it, Maggie. You never could. So why even try?" Our house sat on a quiet street in Chester, Pennsylvania. It looked peaceful from the outside, but inside those four walls, I was fighting a silent war. Not a war of fists or yelling, but something far more subtle. A war made of heaping plates when I said I wasn't hungry, of disgusted looks when I mentioned losing weight, of jokes about old women who think they can still change. For years, I fed myself more on pain than food, but food was how I numbed the pain. Gerald made sure our pantry was always full of junk, not out of love, but out of control. I was receiving government benefits for disability, and he relied on that money. I was the provider. My sick body kept our marriage, our home, and his comfort alive. I remember one morning, it was raining outside and the windows were foggy. I tried to throw away a bag of chips I'd found hidden behind the canned goods. He saw me. He pulled the bag from the trash and dumped it on the counter. Then he said, his eyes cold, "You losing your mind now? Throwing away food? We can't live on salad and pills, Maggie. You're gonna starve us with this nonsense." In that moment, he wasn't just defending the chips. He was defending his power. Gerald needed me to stay fat, sick, stuck, because it meant he was safe. Safe with the government money. Safe from the risk of me waking up and walking away. Safe from losing the life I was keeping up for him. And me? I felt like a ghost. A woman who once dreamed of freedom, health, lightness, and now couldn't even bear to look in the mirror. I had lost my reflection. All I could see was a shadow, bloated, silent, hiding behind oversized clothes and fake smiles. But something started to shift the day I sat in that cold metal chair in a doctor's office. He looked over my blood work and, with a heavy sigh, said, "Margaret, if you don't change, you might not live past 70. It was like someone had poured ice water over my soul, not because of the news, but because of the way he said it. He wasn't talking to a victim. He was talking to someone who still had a choice. And that day, for the first time in many years, I asked myself if there was still a way out. I'll tell you what happened next. But before that, you need to understand who I was on the inside, and what Gerald was doing to me behind closed doors. Because what held me down for so long wasn't just food. It was the invisible abuse. The kind that hides behind sweet words and careful gestures. The kind that rots your soul long before it touches your body. And today, with trembling hands and an open heart, I'm ready to reveal every wound. Because telling this story may not heal me, but it might heal someone out there. Someone like you. If this grandma's story is touching your heart, please leave a like. It helps the channel a lot and shows that you want to hear more true stories like this one. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you won't miss any of the powerful stories coming your way. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it. Sometimes, a simple story can change an entire day. Thank you for being here and listening with your heart. Sometimes, I wonder how long it takes for a person to stop recognizing herself. For me, it wasn't overnight. It was slow, like erosion. One little piece of myself chipped away every day until all that remained was someone I didn't know. A woman who couldn't walk up a flight of stairs without gasping, who avoided mirrors, who stayed home not because she wanted to, but because she was ashamed of how she'd become, and afraid of how Gerald would react if she tried to change. There were days I sat on the edge of our bed, clutching the sides of my nightgown, staring down at my swollen feet. I could barely see my toes. I had to lift my stomach just to breathe. My skin burned in folds I couldn't reach to clean properly. I was in pain, not just from the weight, but from the hopelessness. And still, Gerald brought home greasy burgers, sugary pastries, soda by the gallon. He'd say things like, "I brought your favorite, sweetheart. You've had a rough week. You deserve a treat." But that treat felt like a leash. Every bite took me deeper into a body I no longer controlled. And yet I ate, because it was easier than fighting him, because I was tired, because somewhere along the way, I started to believe maybe this was just who I was meant to be. But even tired women have quiet rebellions. Mine started small. I began taking 10 steps more each day around the house when Gerald was out. I would stand for just 5 minutes longer when washing dishes. I'd drink a glass of water before eating, just to feel a little fuller. These changes were tiny, almost invisible. But to me, they were secret victories. Of course, he noticed. Not the changes, but the energy. The shift in me. "You seem restless lately," he said one afternoon, watching me wipe down the counters. "Thinking of running a marathon or something?" He laughed, but his eyes didn't. That was the thing with Gerald. He rarely raised his voice, but his words always had edges. He cut without shouting. He controlled with calm. When I brought up seeing a nutritionist, he acted amused. "Margaret, please. You're 70. What are you trying to prove? Who are you trying to impress?" That question stung, because he knew the answer. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I was trying to survive. There were nights I cried into my pillow, silently, careful not to make a sound. Gerald hated what he called emotional displays. I remember one time I came back from the doctor. I'd been told my blood sugar levels were dangerous. I told him I needed to start medication. He rolled his eyes and said, "You know what would help more than pills? If you stopped listening to every quack in a white coat. You're fine the way you are." But I wasn't fine. I had sores that wouldn't heal. My legs ached from simply standing. My breath was short even when I was sitting. I knew what was happening to me. My body was shutting down. Slowly, but surely. And Gerald, the man who had once held my hand when we danced in our 20s, was now the one tightening the noose. And still, he depended on me. You see, he didn't work. Hadn't in years. The money that came in each month, that paid for our groceries, our rent, our bills, it was mine. Disability checks, Social Security, whatever little assistance I qualified for. And the truth was, the sicker I stayed, the more secure he felt. The system kept helping, as long as I stayed ill. He never said it out loud, but I could feel it in the way he panicked whenever I showed signs of strength. When I asked about cutting back on fried foods, he suddenly cooked enormous breakfasts. When I skipped dessert, he'd pout, saying, "I guess I'll eat alone again." It was guilt. It was pressure. It was abuse. Just not the kind that leaves bruises. It was invisible, and that made it harder to fight. One evening, I overheard him on the phone with a friend, someone I barely knew. He laughed and said, "Maggie? She'll never leave. She can't even leave the couch without help. She's mine until the end." Those words broke me in half, because I knew, deep down, that he wasn't entirely wrong. Not yet, but something had started to shift inside me. Maybe it was fear of dying. Maybe it was shame. Maybe it was anger. At him. At myself. At all the wasted years. All I knew was I didn't want to disappear inside myself any longer. And I'd have to do it quietly. Secretly. Because any sign of change made Gerald uncomfortable. And when he got uncomfortable, he got cruel. But I was done shrinking. In fear, in spirit, in silence. I just hadn't figured out yet how to become loud again. People think abuse always screams. That it slams doors, throws things, and leaves marks on your skin. But the kind I lived with whispered. It waited in the corner of the room, dressed as concern. It told me I was loved, just before taking away my strength. It didn't yell. It sighed with disappointment when I tried to be something more than what I'd become. I remember a day. It was early autumn, the trees in Chester already golden and trembling. I had just returned from a quiet walk. Not far, just to the corner and back. I'd worn loose sweatpants and tucked a scarf under my coat to cover the folds around my chin. That walk felt like climbing a mountain. But when I stepped back inside, the house, flushed and breathless, I felt proud. Gerald sat in his chair, sipping coffee. He glanced at me over the rim of the mug and said, "You look tired. That little stroll wear you out that bad?" Then he smiled, like it was a joke. But it wasn't a joke. It was a needle. That's how it always was with him. He never told me not to walk. He just made me feel foolish for trying. When I started writing down what I ate, just to see it on paper, he found my notebook and read it out loud in a mocking tone. "Half a banana. 1 boiled egg. You on a prison diet now, Maggie?" Then he laughed. Laughed and laughed until I had to fight not to cry. And that's when I realized something. Gerald wasn't afraid of me getting hurt. He was afraid of me getting free. See, I wasn't just his wife. I was his whole system. I was his financial security, his emotional punching bag, his built-in audience for every cruel joke. If I changed, if I started to truly believe I was worth saving, his world would crumble. But still I stayed. I stayed because I was tired, because I didn't know how to leave, because the world outside our little house felt too big, and I felt too small. And let me tell you something no one ever says out loud. Sometimes being abused feels safer than being alone. There's a kind of twisted comfort in routine. I knew what to expect with Gerald. I knew which words would trigger his cold anger, and which moments might bring a rare flash of tenderness. I'd learned to navigate him like a minefield. That kind of adaptation doesn't go away overnight. I didn't have friends. Gerald didn't like visitors. Said the house was never clean enough. Said people would judge us. So I shrunk my circle to the size of our living room. My phone never rang. My heart, even less. Until one afternoon, at the community clinic, I met Nina. She was a nurse, younger than me, probably in her 40s, with a gentle way of talking that felt like warm tea. She was taking my blood pressure, and she asked, "Do you have support at home?" I opened my mouth. I meant to say, yes. But what came out was silence. She looked at me, really looked, and then she just said, "Okay, I'm here now. You don't have to talk if you're not ready." That was the first time in years someone saw me. Not my weight, not my disability, not my silence. Me. Nina didn't save me. Let's be clear. No one can do that for you. But she gave me something I hadn't felt in decades. Permission to want more. After that appointment, I started doing something radical. I began telling myself the truth. In the mornings, while brushing my teeth, I'd look at my face and whisper, "You deserve to live. Not survive. Live." I would write little notes and hide them in books. "You're not crazy." I'd stick Post-its inside the medicine cabinet. You're allowed to change. Gerald saw none of this. But somehow, he sensed the shift. He started being more attentive. Bringing flowers once, which was strange. Cooking more elaborate meals, but watching closely to make sure I ate them. He even asked, "Everything okay, Maggie? You seem distant lately." I lied. Of course I did, because telling the truth still felt dangerous, but inside, something stronger than fear was blooming. A small, defiant flame. The kind that whispers, "You've been quiet long enough." That winter, I started reading again. Books about healing, nutrition, self-worth. I read them in secret, under the covers, in the bathroom, in the laundry room while the machine spun. Gerald would have mocked them, called them hippie garbage. But I didn't care. I needed those words like oxygen. And one night, while folding towels, I realized I wasn't afraid of dying anymore. I was afraid of dying without ever having lived, and that terrified me more than anything Gerald could ever say. It was in early January that I started hiding food. Not the way I used to. Not candy bars stashed for late-night shame eating. No. This time I hid healthy food. Carrot sticks in plastic wrap, almonds in an old cookie tin, pre-portioned soup in freezer bags labeled with fake names. I had to do it. Because if Gerald found it, he'd eat it. Or worse, throw it away. He didn't like change. Not in me. Not in anything. One evening, I was slicing cucumbers for myself. Quietly, carefully, hoping he wouldn't come into the kitchen. But he did. He walked in, looked at the cutting board, and smirked. "Rabbits eat that stuff, Maggie. You're not a rabbit." I didn't answer. I just kept slicing. But inside me, a fire rose. A stubborn, boiling frustration. I wasn't trying to become a rabbit. I was trying to survive. Later that night, I lay in bed listening to him snore, and I thought, how did I get here? How did I become a prisoner in my own home, in my own skin, in my own life? The answer, of course, wasn't simple. Abuse rarely begins as abuse. It starts as concern, as charm, as someone saying, "Let me take care of you," and slowly turning that care into control. Gerald had once been sweet. We were young. He used to pick wildflowers for me on our walks through Ridley Creek Park. He held my hand in public. He'd whisper in my ear at parties and make me laugh so hard I'd cry. But somewhere along the line, when I gained weight, after my second miscarriage, when I started needing medication, when I couldn't keep up with life the way I used to, something changed, not all at once. Just like the pounds, the manipulation crept in slowly. He started cooking more. At first it felt like love, until I realized it wasn't kindness. It was control. He didn't want me cooking my own meals or deciding what I ate. He wanted me dependent. He wanted me full and quiet. And every time I tried to take back even a sliver of that control, like buying a scale or refusing dessert, he'd find a way to twist it. "You're beautiful the way you are," he'd say. "You're trying to be someone you're not. Why are you making such a fuss at your age?" Age. That was his favorite weapon. "You're nearly 70, Maggie. Let's be real. No one's looking at you. You think you're gonna run away and start a new life now?" And for a long time I believed him. But something had cracked open in me. I'd tasted the idea of a different life, even if only in dreams. I started waking up earlier, not because he asked me to, but because those quiet moments before Gerald stirred were mine. I'd stand by the window, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise over the icy streets, and I'd whisper things to myself. "You're not done yet. Your story doesn't end here. One day, I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. I was wrapped in a worn robe, my hair messy, my face tired. But there was a spark in my eyes I hadn't seen in years. Something stubborn. Something alive. That same afternoon, Gerald saw a book I'd forgotten on the coffee table, a self-help guide on emotional eating. He picked it up and raised an eyebrow. "What's this now? Trying to fix your brain, too?" I wanted to scream. To throw something. But I didn't. I just walked over, took the book gently from his hands, and said, "Yes, I am." He stared at me, not angry, surprised. Like he hadn't expected an answer. That moment changed something. Not in him. In me. Because I hadn't lied. For the first time in years, I'd spoken a truth aloud without apology. And I realized something. Gerald had spent decades making sure I didn't believe in my own voice, because he knew, if I ever started to believe in it again, I wouldn't need him. That night, while he watched TV and I sat in the back room with a notepad, I wrote a list. Things Gerald doesn't control anymore. What I read. What I believe. What I eat in secret. The voice in my head. It was a short list. But it was mine. I folded it up and slipped it into my bra, close to my heart. And for the first time in a long while, I slept without crying. Because even in that small act, that scribbled list, that quiet rebellion, I had chosen myself, and that choice would change everything. People think change comes with a bang, a single moment where everything shifts, the world turns upside down, and you're reborn. But that's not how it happened for me. For me, change came in whispers, in stolen minutes, in the way I began saying no. Not loudly, not defiantly, but simply, calmly, and without guilt. I didn't tell Gerald I'd joined a walking group for seniors. Mostly because I didn't join it, not officially. I just started walking at the same time I saw other women my age pass our street each morning. I'd follow behind, from a distance, pretending I was part of something, hoping one day they didn't know my name. But seeing them, with their jackets zipped up, talking and laughing and moving forward, gave me hope. One morning, after a quiet walk, I came home to find Gerald pacing the kitchen. "Where were you?" he snapped. I'd forgotten to leave a note. "Just outside," I said, wiping my face with a towel. "Needed some air." He looked me up and down. His eyes weren't angry. They were calculating. "You starting to think you're better than this now?" he asked. "What's going on, Maggie? You planning something?" That question froze me. Not because I was, not yet, but because deep inside, I wanted to be. I shrugged and opened the fridge. He watched me in silence. For the next few days, Gerald became clingier. He'd check on me constantly, asked more questions, and started bringing home food again. More than usual. Fried chicken, sugar-loaded pies, boxes of pastries stacked on the table. "Thought you might want a treat," he said. I smiled weakly, but didn't eat them. Instead, I quietly packed some up and gave them to a neighbor's son who delivered our mail. I told him I baked too much. It wasn't just about calories. It was about control. And I wasn't giving mine up anymore. Every night, I journaled. It was simple stuff. What I ate, how I felt, what I wanted. But something strange happened after 2 weeks. I looked back at those pages and realized I hadn't mentioned Gerald once. It shocked me. For so long, my life had revolved around his moods, his needs, his habits. But in those pages, I was the main character again. I wrote about myself, what I wanted, what I missed, what I hoped. And hope is a dangerous thing when you've been taught to live without it. That's when I did something big, something bold. I found a doctor, a new one, a woman named Dr. Collins. She was in her 50s, sharp, and didn't sugarcoat things. She looked at my records and said flat out, "Margaret, this weight is killing you. But not just the weight, the life you're living with it." I nodded. I wanted to cry, but instead, I told her the truth. I told her about Gerald, about the food, the manipulation, the fear. She didn't blink, didn't say, "Why didn't you leave?" or "Why did you stay?" She just said, "That sounds like abuse. You're not crazy. You're not weak. You're stuck. And stuck people don't need judgment. They need plans." So we made a plan. She recommended a support group. Not for weight loss, for emotional abuse survivors. She gave me pamphlets, wrote down phone numbers, and even offered to speak with me over the phone if I was afraid to come in person. I walked out of that office and stood in the parking lot with the paper in my hand, feeling it flutter in the wind like a lifeline. For the first time in years, I saw the way out. But walking back through the front door of my house, our house, was like diving underwater again. I saw the kitchen, the same greasy smell in the air, the same dull light over the table. Gerald was on the couch, remote in hand, slippers kicked off. "How was your checkup?" he asked without looking at me. I hesitated, then I lied. Routine. Nothing new. Because I wasn't ready to let him know that something was new. That something inside me was rising, blooming, and it didn't belong to him anymore. That night, I folded the pamphlet and slid it into my Bible, a book Gerald never touched, and before I went to bed, I whispered to myself the same thing I'd said the night before. You are not broken. You are becoming. And the most dangerous part of all, I was starting to believe it. By mid-February, I had started doing something I never imagined myself doing at this age, planning an escape. Not a dramatic one. There would be no bags thrown in the car, no tearful farewells in the rain. I was too old, too tired, and too wise for that. No, my escape would be slow, quiet, like fog slipping out from under a closed door. I began by reclaiming small parts of my identity. I bought a second-hand tablet online, paid in cash, and had it shipped to a P.O. box a few blocks away. Gerald never knew. On that tablet, I read stories from women like me. I joined anonymous forums. I read articles about late-life abuse, a term I'd never known existed, and learned that what I was experiencing had a name. That was powerful, because when something has a name, it stops being a shadow and becomes something you can fight. One night, I read a story about a woman from Ohio who left her abusive husband at 75. She said, "I chose loneliness over slow death, and I've never felt more alive." I must have read that line 20 times. It became a mantra. At the same time, I kept visiting Dr. Collins. In secret. She noticed my progress, not just in weight, but in posture. I stood a little taller. I laughed, even if only quietly. I had lost 9 pounds, but more than that, I had started to take up space again. Not physically, but emotionally. "You're waking up, Margaret," she said one day. "Keep going." But waking up came with a cost. Gerald felt it. The distance. The light in me he thought he'd extinguished years ago. He began asking more questions, accusing me of hiding things. He'd watch me when I moved around the house, follow me with his eyes like a hawk. "You're different lately," he said once. "Is there someone else?" I almost laughed. Someone else? I hadn't been touched with love in over 20 years. The only someone else was the woman I used to be, and she was finally knocking on the door of my soul. I kept a packed bag hidden in the attic. Just a few things. Clothes, my medications, some money I'd slowly saved from grocery runs where I forgot to buy certain items. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get me somewhere safe if things got bad. And one day, they did. It started with a simple question. "Where were you today?" Gerald asked. He was standing in the hallway, arms crossed, face tight. "At the library," I replied honestly. "You don't even read," he shot back. "I do now," I said. That's when he stepped closer. Not violent, not yet, but close enough for me to smell the tobacco on his shirt. Close enough to feel his anger, buzzing beneath his skin. "What are you hiding, Maggie?" he said. And for the first time in decades, I didn't. Flinch, I looked him straight in the eye and said, "Myself, and I'm done hiding." He didn't respond. He just turned and walked away. But the silence that followed was heavy, tense. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, listening for footsteps, for slammed doors, for anything. But the house stayed, quiet, too quiet. The next morning I found the pantry rearranged. My protein bars were gone. My low-sodium soup cans had vanished. In their place, cookies, chips, frozen dinners packed with salt and sugar. He had made a statement. Loud and clear. I sat on the floor and cried. Not because of the food, but because I knew what it meant. Gerald was afraid, and a man afraid of losing control is a dangerous thing. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. I was tired, yes, but fear no longer ruled me. That afternoon I called a number from the pamphlet Dr. Collins had given me. A woman named Linda answered. Calm, kind, no judgment in her voice. "We've helped women your age before," she said. "You're not alone, Margaret. We can help you transition safely." She said they had a space at a local women's center if I ever needed it. She gave me instructions, safe words, options. And I realized I was no longer planning an escape. I was preparing a new beginning. I folded the paper with Linda's name and number and tucked it into the same spot where my old freedom list lived, close to my heart. Gerald still didn't know. But every day, I got closer to telling him something I knew he'd never believe, that this time I was really going, and I wasn't coming back. It was a Thursday. I remember because I always changed the sheets on Thursdays. Something about the smell of clean linen gave me a sense of peace, even in a home where peace was always hanging by a thread. That morning, Gerald had gone out early. Said he had to run errands. He didn't say where, he never did. But the moment the door closed behind him, I felt it. That rush of air that always came with his absence. Freedom, brief and quiet. Like a sigh I'd been holding in for too long. I went straight to the kitchen. I pulled out the notebook where I tracked my meals and sat down with a cup of unsweetened tea. It was silly, maybe, but I cherished those rituals. They made me feel like I was in charge of my own life again. I was halfway through writing when the front door slammed open. Gerald, home early. I froze. "Maggie," he called, his voice sharp. "Where the hell is it?" My heart pounded. I tucked the notebook under a cushion and walked to the hallway. He was standing there, red-faced, holding something in his hand. My pamphlet, the one from the support center, the one with Linda's number. I must have dropped it. Somehow, somewhere, it had slipped from my bag or pocket. And now, it was in his hand. "What is this? What the hell is this, Maggie?" he barked. I didn't answer. Couldn't. My mouth had gone dry. "You planning to run away? After everything I've done for you?" He was yelling now, not screaming. But his voice was shaking, and that made it worse. He wasn't angry because he loved me. He was angry because he couldn't control me anymore. "You think you're going to do better than this?" he snapped. "You think anyone wants a broken-down old woman like you?" That hit like a slap. But I didn't move, because something inside me had broken. Or maybe, finally healed. "Yes," I said. My voice low, steady. He stared at me, stunned. I don't think he ever expected an answer. Not like that. "Yes, Gerald. I think I deserve better than this. Better than being manipulated. Better than being humiliated. Better than being used." He took a step toward me, and I didn't move. For the first time in decades, I stood still while Gerald hovered over me. And I didn't shrink. I didn't apologize. I didn't back away. I watched something flicker in his eyes. Not rage, not fear. Something else. Loss. He knew. I was leaving. That afternoon, I packed my real bag. Not the small emergency one. My real one. The one with my few good clothes, my medications, my journals. I didn't take much. Just what I needed to begin again. He didn't follow me. He sat on the couch, staring at the TV, as if I was invisible. As if ignoring me might undo what had just happened. But nothing could undo it. I walked out the front door without looking back. The sky was gray, the wind cold against my cheeks, but I felt lighter than I had in years. Every step down that porch was a step out of the prison I had lived in for more than half my life. I took a cab to the center. Linda was waiting outside. She hugged me like she'd known me forever. No questions, no judgment, just warmth. That night, I slept in a small room with floral sheets and a quiet hum from the heater. I cried, not because I was sad, but because I was free. Because I'd done what I never thought I could do. I left, and even if I had no idea what the future would hold, I knew one thing for sure. It would be mine. Freedom doesn't feel like fireworks. At least it didn't for me. It felt like silence. The first morning I woke up at the Women's Center. I opened my eyes to a soft gray light coming through the window and the gentle hum of someone boiling water down the hall. There were no footsteps storming toward my door. No angry voices. No fried food smells drifting under the crack like a trap. Just quiet. It was disorienting. I sat on the edge of the bed, fingers resting on my knees, and listened to the stillness. It was the kind of silence that used to scare me. But now, it was a song I hadn't heard in years, one I didn't know I missed until it came back. Linda came by around 9, knocked softly. "How are you this morning, Margaret?" I didn't know how to answer. I was tired, sore, confused. But okay. For the first time in a very long time, I was okay. She brought me tea and a folder of resources. The center had group sessions, counselors, and even a nutritionist who specialized in recovery from emotional eating. I stared at the list, overwhelmed. "Take it slow," she said gently. "There's no timeline. You've already done the hardest part." But was it really the hardest? Because what came next? Rebuilding, facing myself, unlearning everything I'd been conditioned to believe. That was hard in a different way. I joined one of the afternoon support groups. It was mostly women younger than me, some in their 30s and 40s, a few in their 50s. I was the oldest by far. I almost didn't speak, but when I did, the room got quiet. "I stayed for 30 years, I said. He never hit me, but he starved me of love, of confidence, of myself. A young woman across from me started to cry. She said she'd never heard someone put it into words before, that she thought she was crazy for feeling trapped by words instead of fists, and that's when I realized abuse doesn't have a single face. It wears many masks: kindness, guilt, dependency, routine. But the effect is always the same. It erodes you, slowly, quietly, until you forget you were ever whole. In the days that followed, I began to reclaim small things. I walked every morning, not to lose weight, but because I could. I cooked my own meals again, learning how to nourish my body instead of punishing it. I stood in front of a mirror and looked myself in the eye, even if only for a few seconds at first. It wasn't always beautiful. Healing never is. Some nights I woke up crying, missing the predictability of my old life. That part surprised me, how much I missed the routine of my own suffering, because even pain can become familiar. Even pain can feel safe when it's all you've known. One day, Linda sat with me in the garden behind the center. It was early spring, the first buds just beginning to show. "You know," she said, "you've inspired a few women here. They look at you and see what's possible." I shook my head. "I'm just surviving," I said. "Exactly," she smiled. "That's the bravest thing of all." That night, I pulled out my old journal, the one Gerald never knew about. I flipped to the last page and wrote, "Today, I walked 3 blocks without stopping. I said no to something I didn't want. I laughed, really laughed, during lunch. I looked in the mirror and didn't look away. I don't know who this woman is yet, but I'm proud of her. I started to make friends. Not many. Just a few women I trusted, slowly. We shared stories over coffee, compared recipes, traded books. They didn't look at me like I was old or broken. They looked at me like I was alive. And for the first time, I felt it too. Of course, there were still shadows. Some nights I'd dream Gerald was standing at the door, arms crossed, asking where I'd been. I'd wake up breathless, heart pounding. But every time I reminded myself, he isn't here. He doesn't own me anymore. And just like that, the breath would return. Freedom, I learned, isn't just walking away from someone. It's learning to walk toward yourself. There's a kind of silence that used to terrify me. The kind that settled in after a man had finished yelling, or after the last bite of guilt-laced dinner. A silence full of tension, expectation, dread. But now, the silence in my life feels different. It's the silence of peace. It's sitting in a quiet kitchen with a cup of tea, and hearing only the ticking of the wall clock. It's reading a book with no footsteps approaching. It's breathing deeply, and knowing I don't owe anyone an explanation for existing. I still have bad days. I won't pretend I don't. Some mornings I wake up with the old thoughts clinging to me like cobwebs. You're not worth this. You'll fail. You'll go back. But those voices are fainter now, and each time I answer them back. Not with anger, but with truth. I am worth this. I'm already succeeding, and I'm never going back. 3 months after leaving Gerald, I stood in front of a group of women in the support center's common room. Linda had asked me to share my story, the whole thing. My knees trembled, and my voice cracked. But I spoke. I told them about the food, the manipulation, the way he twisted love into control. I told them how long I stayed, and how long it took me to leave. When I finished, no one clapped. There was no applause, just silence and then a quiet sniffle. A woman in her 60s reached for my hand. "That's me," she whispered. "That's my life. You just said it out loud." That moment changed something in me, because I realized telling my story wasn't just healing me. It was lighting a path for others. After that, Linda and I began talking about me leading a weekly group, just for older women, for those who felt invisible, forgotten, stuck, the ones who thought change was only for the young. And let me tell you something. The most dangerous lie we're ever told is that we're too old to begin again. So I started. The first meeting had 3 women, then 6, then 10. We didn't just talk about leaving bad marriages. We talked about dreams, about cooking again, walking again, writing poetry, learning to swim, saying no without guilt, saying yes to ourselves. I watched women who had once stared at the floor begin to lift their heads. I saw them walk a little straighter, laugh a little louder. I saw myself in all of them. Meanwhile, my own life began to bloom in quiet ways. I found a small apartment with a garden window and a second-hand bookshelf that I painted soft blue. I filled it with cookbooks and memoirs and novels about strong women. I planted basil and cherry tomatoes in pots outside. I learned to make soup that nourished, not punished. I walked every morning, not to shrink, but to feel my heartbeat. One day, while shopping at a local market, I bumped into Nina, the nurse from months ago, the one who'd asked if I had support. She stared at me for a moment, then smiled wide. "You look alive, Margaret." I laughed. "I am," I said. "I really, really am." She hugged me, not out of pity but joy. That night, I wrote in my journal, again, "I'm not who I used to be. I'm not who I thought I'd become. I'm someone new, someone still growing, someone worth knowing. There are still scars. There always will be. But they don't define me anymore. They remind me of who I was, of what I survived, of who I chose to become, and the woman I am now. She doesn't ask for permission. She doesn't wait to be chosen. She chooses herself." It was a warm morning, in late spring, the kind of morning that smells like grass and hope. I had just opened the window in my little apartment, and the breeze rolled in like an old friend. The sun touched the walls gently, lighting up the photos I'd started hanging, not of family, but of moments. A picture of my hands holding a warm bowl of soup, a photo of the community garden where I'd started volunteering, a snapshot of me, smiling, at the head of a table, leading a group session. They weren't grand things, but they were mine. I walked to the bathroom and caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. No makeup, hair pulled back, wrinkles like soft rivers down my cheeks. A body still marked by years of neglect, but straighter, firmer, and yes, smaller. But what struck me most wasn't how I looked. It was how I stood, upright, calm, present. For years I had looked in the mirror and only seen shame. Now I saw resilience. I reached up, touched the reflection with my fingertips, and whispered, "You made it." Because I had. Leaving Gerald hadn't been the end of a story. It was the beginning of a whole new one. One where I wasn't a character in someone else's plot. One where I was the author. I used to think freedom would feel like running, a frantic sprint into the unknown. But it doesn't. Freedom, for me, feels like walking slowly through a farmer's market and picking out tomatoes. It feels like paying bills with money I earned myself and cooking for one without feeling lonely. It feels like setting my own bedtime, waking when I want, drinking my tea hot and uninterrupted. I don't wait for someone to tell me what I'm allowed to eat anymore. I don't hide food in secret corners. I eat what makes me feel alive. And you know what else? I laugh now, not politely, not carefully. I laugh from my belly, and it shakes the whole room. Sometimes I catch myself mid-laugh and feel tears sting my eyes, not from sadness, but disbelief, because for so long, I didn't think I'd ever laugh like this again. Sometimes I still see Gerald's face in my mind. Not with hate, not anymore. With clarity, with distance. I see now what he was, a scared man who wrapped himself in control. A man who depended on my silence to feel strong. A man who broke things because he didn't know how to build them. But that's not my burden anymore. His voice doesn't live in my head now. Mine does. And my voice tells me truths I'd forgotten. That I am still worthy of love. That I am still capable of change. That I am still here. And I matter. at the support group. I tell other women that healing doesn't come in a straight line. Some days you feel like a lion, and others like a puddle, and that's okay. What matters is that you don't stop showing up for yourself. A few weeks ago, one of the younger women in the group, a woman named Trish, came to me after a session. She took my hand and said, "Margaret, you saved me." I shook my head. "No, darling. You saved yourself. I just reminded you that it was possible." That's all any of us need, really. A reminder that it's never too late. Not to change. Not to live. Not to become the person we always should have been. I'm 70 now. My body carries the weight of my years, my choices, my pain, and my joy. But I am not too late. And neither are you. I used to believe that endings were final, that leaving a man like Gerald, walking away from decades of pain, was the last chapter in a long, sad book. But I was wrong, because the day I left him wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a new kind of life, a life not built around survival, but presence. A life that asks, "What now?" instead of "Why me?" Some people think it's too late to start over at 70. Let them think it. I know what's real. What's real is the breath I take each morning without the weight of fear on my chest. What's real is sitting on my porch with a warm cup of tea and a breeze on my face, knowing I don't owe anyone an explanation for my peace. What's real is this. I found myself again. Not all at once, and not without pain. But I did. And I did it quietly, stubbornly. Lovingly, I wrote letters I'll never send her to the woman I used to be, to the girl I once was, to the man who almost convinced me I was nothing. I forgave that girl for staying too long. I forgave that woman for believing the lies. And I even found a way to release the man who hurt me. Not because he deserved it, but because I did. Because carrying the weight of his cruelty would have kept me anchored to a past I no longer belonged to. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't saying what you did was okay. It's saying, I won't let what you did define me anymore. That's the real power. Now, every time I tell my story, whether in a group, in a letter, or just across the table from another woman sipping tea with trembling hands, I'm reminded that healing is contagious, that our pain, when spoken aloud, becomes a bridge for someone else to cross. And that's why I'm sharing this with you now, because maybe you're not 70, maybe you're 40 or 60 or 80. Maybe you're in a quiet house like I once was, wondering if this is as good as it gets. Wondering if anyone would believe you if you said you were being hurt without bruises. So let me be clear. If you feel like you're disappearing, you're not crazy. If someone is feeding your pain and calling it love, you're not to blame. If you want to leave and you're scared, you're not alone. I see you. I was you. And now? Now I am a woman who walks without asking permission, who eats without shame, who speaks without fear, a woman who once believed she would die small and silent, but instead chose to live loud and true. Sometimes I still talk to myself in the mirror. Old habit. But now, I say different things. I say, I'm proud of you, Margaret. I say, thank you for staying alive long enough to find your way back home. Because that's what healing really is. It's a coming home. Not to a place, but to yourself. And if this story has reached you, touched something inside you, then please, don't let it stop here. Tell your story. Whisper it. Write it. Sing it. Someone needs your truth, like I once needed mine. And when you do, when you finally let the light in, you'll realize something I wish someone had told me long ago. It's never too late. Not to change, not to heal, not to be loved. And above all, it's never too late to choose yourself.